Welcome back to my playground. Really appreciate you stopping by. Today we're going to be talking about something that is always difficult for most people starting out when it comes to mixing or production, and that's bass. We're going to dive into 808s, synth bass, kick drums. It's taken me years to figure out how to get bass to sound good. I'm about to save you a whole lot of time right now. So why is it so challenging to mix bass? A lot of times it's challenging to mix bass because we don't actually hear the truth in our room. And what I mean is a lot of times the bass is bouncing off the back wall, not really giving you an accurate representation of what's really going on in your mix. It's also being built up in the corners. And this is the reason why a lot of studios invest a lot of money on treating their rooms so that they're reducing the room reflection and they're getting a more accurate representation of what the top end is doing and what the bottom end is doing and what the mid-range is doing. But most importantly, what the bottom end is doing, because that's the part that is most inaccurate when in terms of bouncing off of your room. So we're going to dive in to some basic things you can do from a home setup to ensure that you're getting an accurate representation of what the bass in your mix is doing. And also, I'm going to show you a couple of little tricks about how to make your bass be perceived as fat. You'll understand more in just a minute. All right, so let's dive in. Bass, everything we need to know to get that sound we're all looking for. We're going to start with 808. If you take a look at my session here, what you're going to see is I've got 808 fat and 808 top, and I'm going to explain more about that in just a minute. But for right now, what I want to do is play you this little beat that I put together just for this tutorial, and this is going to be without any bottom end. So no kick, no bass, no synth bass or anything like that. This is just top end. Take a listen. Okay, so with that, I added a little bit of a 808, fat 808. Now I want you to take a close listen to what's happening here, because I think what you're going to realize is that the bottom end is cool, but it lacks something. Take a listen. I'll turn off all my plugins here. Here we go. All right, so you can hear that 808, right? But here's the thing about bass. A lot of times, what we perceive is happening is not really happening. And so let me bring up this very special plugin that all of you need to have. It's made by Isotope and it's called Tonal Balance Control. You gotta have this, especially if you're working from home, if you're working in headphones. This is a lifesaver. So like I said in the intro, bass likes to lie to you. And so this is one of those things that we can use to make sure our bass is telling the truth. Keep our bass honest. So here's what we do. Basically what this is this is a representation of the energy buildup across the EQ spectrum. So this part right here is the energy buildup from 40 hertz to 200 hertz, and then from 400 to 2000, and then from 2000, so on and so forth. So it's divided into these sections, and watch what happens when I hit play. So what this is showing me is per section where the tonal balance is kind of sitting. And what I'm looking to do is I want these white bars to be comfortably sitting within these green boxes. And these green boxes are set based on how I set my target. So my target right now I put on bass heavy, and then you have three choices. You can do modern, you can do orchestral, but right now we're doing like a hip hop kind of vibe. So we want that street cred. So we're gonna go with bass heavy. And what this is saying is our target area for the low end from 40 to 200 hertz needs to fall within this green box in order for it to translate well on different speakers. Now, same thing, mid-range. Now, my mid-range may not be so accurate right now because this is also based off of songs with vocals and mine doesn't have any vocals. But for the most part, what we're most focusing on right now is going to be this low-end information right here. We need this white line staying, we don't want it to go past the green and we don't want it to go under the green because then we're going to have some issues. And so this is just a visual way of making sure that we're keeping our bass honest. So I'm going to hit play again. We give it a little bit to calculate. It takes about 10, 15 seconds and it starts to settle into an average. So you can see for the most part, I'm pretty safe already. You know, my bass is already up at the top as far as even what a bass heavy track should have. It's already at the top of this. So why is it that I don't feel it? Like, why is it that I don't feel like I'm going to be bumping this in the car and it's going to be knocking? Well, the answer to that is it's not because I don't have enough bottom end. It's because I don't have enough definition in the bottom end. Whenever I'm working with fat 808s and even kicks and synth basses, which we'll get to, but when I'm working with an 808, an easy trick to do is to copy that 808. So first thing I did is I literally made another track and then I copied that exact 808 right down to it. So if we listen to the second track and we take off all of the plugins and stuff like that on it, we'll hear the same thing. Right? Now, what I did though is I want to focus on the top end of this 808. So first thing I did is I brought up my channel EQ and I got rid of all of that low end information because we're already going to have it in the first bass. So right now we're just dealing with the second bass. We're already going to have it in the first bass. We don't need it in the second bass. As you can see, our tonal balance is already telling us we're at the top of where we want to be in order for this bass to translate well. So we don't want to add any more bottom end here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all that bottom end out. We're going to boost the mid range, right? So now this is what we have. Okay, sounds real thin and lifeless and definitely no street cred. It's okay. The next thing I did is I wanted to add some harmonics. So harmonics are like extra tones that are added into the sound. So what happens is adding additional information to the sound that's going to help add definition. So there's a lot of ways you could do that. You could add a distortion, like they have the decapitator. There's so many things out there that you can use. You can actually do it the old-fashioned way, which is what I did. And I opened up an analog compressor and I drove the input of the compressor really hard so that I'm getting analog distortion. Take a listen. So I just took this input gain and I just cranked it, right? And so what I'm getting is distortion. If I turn it off, turn it on. So I'm getting a lot of distortion, but it's good distortion. It's that creamy distortion. It doesn't sound unpleasant, right? It's good distortion, but I'm also getting the transient. It's knocking just a little bit harder because that's also a byproduct of using a compressor and cranking a compressor is it's going to make the transients punchy depending on, your attack and release. So I've got it set to where I'm getting that nice attack transient that I want. But in addition to that attack transient that I want, I'm also getting a whole lot of harmonics, right? So now let's listen one more time. Right? Now, mind you, there's no bottom end in this. We took all the bottom end out. So now let's listen to our original bass. All right, now let's bring this one in. Right? It's creating that fatness. Right now, watch when I bring everything else in with it. I'm gonna just mute my attack bass, my top bass, and watch how we lose the energy. We lose the energy, right? But when you bring it in, it's there. There you go. That's getting that 808 to cut through the mix is not about the bottom as nearly as much as it is about the top. Let's move on to another one. So let's go to our kick real quick. This is just a regular kick that I put in here, assuming that I wasn't going to use an 808 and I'm just using the kick for this track, and maybe a synth bass. Let's take a listen to this kick raw here. Okay, so two things I noticed. Number one, the bottom end of the kick is kind of thin, and it's also got a shaker or something that is on top of the sample as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get rid of a little bit of that shaker, and I'm going to try to add a whole lot of fatness to this kick using the same technique that I used for the 808. So let's take a look real quick. First thing I did is I brought up an EQ, just a basic EQ in Logic, and let me get rid of the tonal balance. I reduced it using a low pass filter. So I'm bringing out a whole lot of the top end, and that's because I want to get rid of that shaker. Just take a listen, right? If I turn it off, right, turn it back on, we're just getting rid of that shaker. And this kick is going to serve as our bottom end kick, right? So the very next thing I did is I brought in a analog styled EQ called Twig Tech, and I'm boosting the 60 hertz range quite a bit. So let's take a listen. Right? That's thumping. Okay? So I'm getting a whole lot of that meat that I wasn't getting before. If I turn it off, turn it on. So I'm getting a nice chunky kick now. But this chunky kick with the music is still going to be missing something because it's not going to be cutting through. So the brain is not going to perceive it as fat as it could perceive it. Let's take a listen with the rest of the music. It's pretty good, right? But to take it to the next level, what I did is copied that exact same kick to another track, kick top. What I've called it. I've EQ'd still some of that shaker out a little bit. I've also EQ'd out most of the bottom end. I'm all the way up to 255 hertz of high pass EQ, which means I'm pulling out quite a bit. And the whole reason is because what I really want to focus on is the top end of the kick. So let's take a listen. Just the top end of the kick. Not very impressive, right? That's all right. It is the first part of what we're trying to do here, which is we just want to isolate that top end clicky part of the kick. And then the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to use a transient modeler. And this one you can find in Native Instruments. If you've got Native Instruments, you can go to Native Instruments, Transient Master. And in this case, I think it's selected on stereo because this happens to be a stereo track. So Transient Master helps us create that punch, the attack that we're looking for. So this is with Transient Master off. This is with it on. Right? So you're getting a nice little clicky, poppy kind of a sound coming from the top end of the kick. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use this top end of the kick and we're going to blend it with our low fat kick, and it's going to give the appearance of a kick that is knocking, right? So let's take a listen real quick with them both on. Turn all this up. Now watch, if I turn off my low, this is what we get. If I turn off the top, this is what we get. Not bad, right? But when you put some vocals on there and maybe some more production, your kick starts to get lost. So you've got that top end of the kick to really cut through the mix. Now the kick is knocking. And I can always balance that. I can say, I don't need to knock so much. And that attack is going to sound good everywhere. That's the secret. That attack is going to cut through on earbuds. It's going to cut through on massive club speakers. It's going to cut through in a gym auditorium. It's going to cut through wherever you're listening to on your cell phone speakers, you're going to hear that attack a lot more than you're going to hear that bottom end. And so by hearing that attack, it gives the brain the perception that the bottom end is fat. Without it, you're going to end up, it'll sound dope in the studio, then you get it in the car and it's lost something. It's not as punchy as it was before. And that's because we haven't focused on the top end of the bottom. So there we go. That's Kick Trick. Right? Now, let's go one more. Let's take a listen to a synth bass. So this is just a bass line that's playing along with this track. Let's take a listen. It's nice and fat, right? But lacks a little definition. Watch what happens when I copy that bass and use the same technique I used on the 808, where I'm getting rid of a lot of the low, and then I'm running it through an analog compressor where I'm cranking up the input. Let's take a listen to just that. So that is a bass, exact same bass, but with the bottom end cut out, the sub frequencies cut out, and then I'm cranking it into an analog compressor that's creating distortion, right? Distortion, another word for the distortion would be, it's creating those harmonics. It's giving us extra notes to play with. And with those notes, they're going to cut through the mix a lot better. By itself, not too impressive. But watch what happens when you play it with its counterpart. Doesn't that just sound way fatter, right? Now let's see what it sounds like with everything else. I'm gonna just get rid of it. That's cool, but when you take that to the car, it's going to become less defined. And because there's going to be less definition, the brain is going to perceive it as mud. But as soon as you bring in that top end, the brain can make sense of what's happening on the bottom, right? And that's the secret. We didn't actually make our bottom any fatter. We made the definition more clear so that the mind can understand what's actually happening down there. And so it's perceived as fatter. Basically, I gave you 3 examples where I'm pretty much using the exact same technique for each one of them to make the point that how we perceive bottom is not necessarily what we think it is. There's definitely got to be those sub-frequencies there, but more important than just the sub-frequencies, there's got to be definition so that the brain can understand what those sub-frequencies are actually doing. Otherwise, it's perceived as just mud. So there you have it. We did an 808, we did a kick, and we did a bass. Now let's put this synth bass and this kick together and let's see what we got. So I hope that cleared things up for you when working with bass, at least a little bit, especially when working with 808s, kicks, and synths. These techniques are going to help you just ensure that you're getting that bottom end that you want. At the same time, you're getting the clarity and the definition that you need. And these techniques, doesn't matter if you're in Logic, doesn't matter if you're in Pro Tools or Cubase or whatever, it's universal. These things will help you, not only as a mixing engineer, but also as a record producer. If you're somebody producing records and you're going through your sounds and you're picking your sounds, start thinking about that, the way the relationship between the bottom of the bass and the top of the bass and how they're working together to create the perception of something that's fat. All right, Marcus Davis here. You guys have a good night. I'll see you next time.